Yeah, let's get right to it. So we're going to start. I'm going to throw out some stats here, Neil. You just dive in when something catches your eye.
Okay.
So for 6 months in a row now, inventory has been declining. That's the number of homes available for sale. We're down almost 20% from this time last year. So that means sellers are not selling their home. This actually helps prop up the market because
Super
sellers know.
weird.
Yeah, I mean, sellers know that buyers aren't confident. If buyers aren't confident, sellers aren't going to put their home in the market. They know they're not going to get as much, and maybe they don't have anywhere to go. So we're down almost 20% from this time last
I
year.
think that's going to change.
You think people are going to feel the pinch soon and start to unload?
I think so. I think there's also this idea of like when people are doing stuff, people tend to follow. There's like a weird thing of like, well, if they're selling, even though things are down, I think it's probably because there's more fall to come, and there's potentially on the back end, I'll be able to get in at a better price. Like if it's falling, I'll sell now, and then I'll hopefully buy in further down the line. I feel like it's the
Yeah.
same for people who are buying. Like they kept buying, and it's like people kind of saw the writing on the wall, but it's like, well, he just bought, so I got to buy.
Yeah, or I'm hearing it's a bad time to list, so I'm not gonna list.
Yeah,
But then necessity might change that.
yeah.
In the Greater Toronto Area, which is kind of the biggest market in Canada, it was the lowest inventory in August for 20 years. Again, not surprising, except
That's
when you think of how
insane.
much the city has grown in 20 years, and there are still less homes for sale now in this August than there were in Toronto 20 years ago.
This is proof that just like interest rates don't. It's not just an interest rate thing. Even though again, I think it's going to come in about 6 months from now that we're going to see people who necessity sell. But it's interest rates don't just force people to list houses or leave a bunch of houses on market. We've talked about it 1 million times that the inventory is the issue, and the only way this is going to go up is by building more houses. You just
Yeah,
physically need more homes. So, I'm
yeah.
surprised how pronounced it is. That it's 20 years that they haven't had slow because I feel like Toronto's had like crazy boom years where
Oh
like
my gosh. And you'd think like even just bringing on a couple projects online that release, I don't know, a few hundred condos into the market that would be
yeah.
enough alone to offset that. But no, the lowest inventory in 20 years. And it's like the third lowest inventory in 20 years in Vancouver. But the question is, what is this doing to pricing? To your point, where we're just talking about, sellers are not yet feeling the pinch. They're not unloading properties yet. That's why the volume is shrinking. But the house price index dropped 2.1% for the month of August, which is the biggest 1 month drop in the history of the index. So that means you take all of this average. This is kind of like almost like an inflation measure for housing, if housing was treated like a good, and it dropped 2.1% across the country.
What does that index measure exactly?
So it measures the average home price, seasonally
Okay.
adjusted average home price across these 31 major centers
Did you
in
happen to
Canada.
get that number?
What's that?
Did you happen to get that number? What the price is now?
Oh, I think gosh, it's in, I want to say,
7.
no, it's lower than that. I don't have it offhand. No.
Okay.
And
It peaked
realize,
out over 8. It was
yeah,
8:30 at the start of the year.
but also realize that it weights them all kind of equally because it takes the 31 cities and weights them together, right? So
Oh,
it's not going to be as skewed by say things that take the total number of sales, like
or
where
like
Toronto
there's a
skews things,
bazillion in
right?
Toronto.
So it really does measure the thing that's going on, and that's the biggest drop.
One thing I want to point out too about this inventory that might also skew data a little bit is like the idea. So in Toronto, I know I saw it somewhere that there was the amount of cranes in the sky had gone down and the number of projects being proposed had gone down. And it's simply a matter of like they're running out of necessarily sites to do, and
Right.
the price of
Yeah.
those sites has gotten so high that the actual project numbers within Toronto have gone down. But then the surrounding towns or cities are actually still having quite a bit of growth, right? And like that's what we've talked about before is the auxiliary areas that are outside of the main city have these big growth nodes. It was the same in Vancouver. Like downtown Vancouver, there were very few cranes, but then Burnaby, whichever it was, like it's an hour away, Burnaby had cranes galore and
Yeah.
buildings just shooting through the sky.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that might change a little bit the stats. It might move the stats a little bit on the
Totally,
inventory
and that's
side.
that's why I wanted to go through these stats and really break them down because there's some kind of contrary and some sort of interpretation stuff that needs to be done when you think of even just how turbulent this 1 year has been.
Yeah.
So this measure takes 31 cities, and for the month of August, every single of those 31 cities declined in their pricing, except for 3 cities, all in the same province. Neil,
Oh,
name those cities. Name that province.
God. Wow. Please let me think here. So 31, 3 cities. Do we have
They're all in the same province.
is the province of Nova Scotia?
It is not.
Moncton, Fredericton.
No, it's Alberta.
I was gonna go with Alberta because I was like, oil boom's going nuts and they're doing great out there. No way.
Calgary, Edmonton, and Lethbridge actually all saw
Lethbridge.
moderate increases in their home price index for the month of August. Every other city in Canada declined. So if you're listening from Alberta, give it a little shout. Let us know that you're there. And you should take some comfort that while the rest of the country is seeing a pullback in pricing, those three cities were the only three major cities in Canada included in this measure that saw an increase in pricing.
It doesn't surprise me though, because you know what? They were actually reasonably affordable in the sense that their house price average wasn't that high. Their average income was high. Their overall taxes are low, and now there's a boom in the oil sector. So like I feel like they are poised to have good growth right now and kind of be able to weather the storm, assuming that oil can stay propped up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pulled back a bit, but hopefully it can stay over a profitable level.
Also, a lot of Alberta has had some really, really weird ebbs and flows that I saw something where, like, over the last 15 years, they're really only up about 30%.
That's what I mean. Like
Right.
they haven't had a lot of like that's why their pricing's still so reasonable.
But they also had some pullbacks. And if you think, well, 30% over 15 years, man, that's 2% a year. That is very sustainable.
Yeah.
It's less than inflation. It's less than income growth. So, I guess shout out to Alberta.
Moving everything to
They're in
Alberta.
good position maybe to weather the tide here. So an interesting thing that they also measured was how far cities have come from their reported peak. And what they did is they took the national peak, which they measure as May. Now, you and I may disagree with this. When do you think the absolute peak was? Anecdotally.
April.
Yeah.
Start of April sort of thing, mid-April.
I sort of felt like the transactional peak was March and April, but those deals close May, June, July. That's why like there is this
yeah, true.
pricing lag. So they say that the actual home price index across Canada peaked in May, and since then it's down 4%. But it had a really significant kind of range here. So Hamilton down 10.5% from that peak,
Okay.
which is not insignificant.
No.
Halifax, near and dear to our hearts, down 8.7%
Yeah, that sounds
since the
about right.
peak.
Yeah.
Toronto down 8.3%.
Really? That's it?
Yeah.
I guess
Now,
again,
again-
the same thing. The downtown core just tightened up. Nobody decided to sell. There hasn't been much panic selling.
But listen to these areas as well. Abbotsford, Mission area down 15%. Brantford down 13.6%. Ottawa, Peterborough, and Windsor areas kind of 12 to 13% from the peaks in May.
Interesting.
Yeah, those are some pretty big numbers. And HRM I saw actually just from July to August, we dropped 3.8%.
That's not as bad though as I think everyone was expecting. But again, like we talked about last week, I suspect the worst is to come, and I think you're going to see another 10 to 15 points off a lot of those next year. Like I really do believe that because again, I think it's a sentiment drop. Like I think people like these prices have come down on sentiment and the idea of fear and scarcity, like people being afraid of like what's to come, but not because it's actually happened yet. But I think next year when we feel what's actually going to happen, yeah, we've priced in some of the drops, so it's done an overnight drop of 30%,
Yeah.
but it'll still be another drop of 10 to 15 points. It'll be more gradual. So this way, instead of your house going from 500 to 300 in a month, now your house went from 500 to 300 over 8 months.
That feels a little better.
It's not so bad.
The worst is yet to come. Thanks, Neal, for chiming in. What's kind of curious, though, and this is sort of interesting. People have to remember it's so hard to go back in time. But remember August of 2021 and things were just cooking along.
It's really hard to go
Right.
back in time.
Go back in time in our imaginary mind space. So, do you remember August 2021? This time last year, things were cooking along.
Things were cooking.
Right, market was going well.
Yeah.
And it continued on that upward trend, like we said, at least until February, March, if not
Yeah.
even until April, May, depending on how you're measuring.
Yeah.
So there was a huge run up from August until that peak of May. And really, it was probably a run up to that absolute height, probably around 20% or so. Because
Yeah.
what's interesting is from August of 2021, the whole market is actually still up almost 9%. It's up 8.9%
Yeah.
from the last 12 months. So while the recent trend has been quite poor, homes are still worth 10% more than they were just last year in this current moment across this index.
It's literally like the charts. It's like the motion you do with your hand. It's like it gets going, starts picking up steam, starts picking up more steam. And near the end, it's just skyrocketing. Like those last couple of months, I was looking at a place that sold in March of last year, It was up for 350 and it sold for 485. And now the neighboring properties, which are identical, are both listed at like 365 and they can't sell. And
Oh
like
man,
this dude's
I
got to be
hear ya.
sitting there being like, I just paid 485 and now my neighbors are trying to sell the identical product for 365.
Yeah,
But that was right at the peak. And so prices and people were just like fatigued and like, I
full
need a
psycho mode.
house and I need to just go full in. And like, so it just like shoots up straight, right? Like it's that exponential curve. And so like the first year of this growth that we saw in like 2019, you probably saw that same amount of growth, if not more, in the last 3 to 6 months. Like
Oh yeah.
it was insane. Like it just started picking up the pace like crazy.
So, well, over the last 12 months, so from last August, as a country, we're up almost 9%, but year to date, we're only up about 6.5%. So that kind of shows that at some point here, we've started giving away a lot of those increases that we got.
Yeah.
Halifax is still up 15% since last August.
Wow.
Victoria is still up about 15%.
Yeah.
Vancouver's still up 8%. Calgary's up 13.5%. Montreal up 12%. Toronto up almost 8%. So compared to last August,
Yeah.
things are still up quite a bit.
Yeah.
So people keep talking about, oh, we're going to give it all back. We still have a pretty significant, we still have 9% just to bring us back even with last August.
Chandler's got no fear.
No, I'm just saying, like,
Take the rates to 14%.
twist it, turn the screws. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, you can look at this two ways. One, if you purchased a home last year in August, you are still significantly further ahead. Saying nothing for the fact that you probably got a better rate and blah, blah, blah. You are still significantly far ahead. In Halifax, you're still 15% ahead. The question now is how much of that are we going to give back? Because we gained, there was a point probably where from August until the peak, like we're up 20%, and now it's trickling back and back.
Yeah.
So how much do we think we're going to give back? There is a pretty good cushion there to even hit us from a year ago. I would think, and you see some projections that our actual year to date, like when we hit December 31st, our actual change is only going to be about 2% growth for all of 2022, which means that we'll have had this massive increase in the first 3 or 4 months of 20 or 23%, and we'll give it all back by the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I think we're going to go down another 10, 15 points. Potentially maybe more. I'm like back and forth to see what's coming. I think we're gonna give it all back and a bit more. Like it only makes sense to give it all back and a bit more.
When I was broke, I had rich habits. When I was broke, I had rich habits.